Okay, for those who have gone through first aid courses before and CPR courses before, you can remember the ABCs, still there, the airway, the breathing, the compressions and CPR, but they've added to it. So they've added defibrillation, they've added now doctor and now doctors, ABC. So it's looking at danger, both to the victim and to the rescue. We're going to go through each one of this, looking for a response, sending for help. The airway, breathing, compression, CPR are still in there, and defibrillation. Some of you may have heard of the SAFE approach, shout for help, approach with care, free from any danger, and then evaluate the ABCs. We're talking about mostly children. I'll deal with adults just briefly at the end. Depending who the adult is, whether you feel comfortable putting your mouth with or without a shield on theirs, depends whether you will do the compressions, the airway and the breathing, or just the compressions. If you just do the compressions, it's the cardio heart, cerebral brain resuscitation. It keeps the heart and the brain alive, and that's often what people do if it's a stranger and they're not comfortable. Okay, so danger. Before you rush in and do anything to actually see what's happening, let's think how we can, is there any possible danger to the rescuer or to you? And let's try and make both as safe as possible. So for instance, if you use your face shield, if you use your gloves, you are going to protect yourself from any blood, saliva that may or may not be carrying something that could infect you. If we're thinking of traffic, we can think of things like broken glass. Be careful when you're getting someone out or putting them onto the ground. There's blood, there's gravel, things like that. You might get someone to divert the traffic around you to make you safer. If we're talking about people with electrical wires, when we're talking about our response, we do this often, and we'll show it in a moment. If you do that, you're going to be zapped onto them. If you touch them with the back of your hand, muscles will contract away from them, and you can get something non-conducting to actually get the wires away. Someone with dangerous fumes, if your little one's in a house, of course you're going to want to get in, but think of how you can protect yourself. If you go low and go slow, that's good, but the fumes can get into your mouth and nose and cause problems. So if you get something to at least cover your mouth and nose, so a jumper, a scarf, something to prevent those going in is going to help. Dangerous water currents, you see people dive in and get swept away. People now are very sensible, they do the human chain, or they get ropes to be able to pull people back. The last thing I mentioned there was someone having an epileptic fit with sharp furniture. Now, if someone's small, easy enough to get them safe and out of the way. However, if they're an adult, they've fallen off their chair, their arms and legs are jerking, they might be too big to move. However, you can move furniture away from them to keep them safe. If they're in the water, at least you can keep their head out of the water so they don't aspirate, breathe in the water. So think of danger before you do anything. Now, the next thing we do is talking about response. If you do a formal course, they will talk a lot more about consent, but I think in this day and age, and even just for courtesy, it's probably a good idea to say, is it okay to touch you? And I think that's quite reasonable. They'll talk more about it when you do a formal course. But what we're doing is we're checking in our response, are they conscious? Can they be roused? And it's talking and touching. And we're going to talk about cows. We're not going rural, but we're going to talk about, can you hear me? Open your eyes. What's your name? Squeeze my hand. Now that's fine for someone who's a bit bigger than this little person here. This little person here, you do a gentle rub of the shoulders. Now, I know by this time you'd be feeling quite panicked, but no, it's a gentle rub of the shoulders. As I said, if they haven't got electrical wires around them. Now, people will actually say, oh, I've heard you're supposed to slap them on the face. What will happen there is you get a nerve, like a reflex nerve, like a knee jerk, but it is a response. So please, that gentle rub of the shoulders. If you have witnessed the accident, or if you don't know, you have to assume that their neck may be fragile. And this is including if they've dived into a shallow bit of water and might have hit their head. We're worrying about their neck. So now is when you have to think, before I do anything to them, let me protect their neck. So you can take off jumpers and pack around them. If you're lucky enough to have two people there, then you can actually ask one of them to act as their neck brace before the ambulance arrives. And I'll just put my little friend this way. Even just holding your hands like this on the side, the person holding hands like this inside is going to stop side-to-side movement, but far better to use your forearms as the neck brace to stop the movement. So hands in their armpits and put your forearms so they can't move their head. If you're by yourself and you can't do that, just putting a hand on their forehead is going to stop that back side-to-side movement and packing around them. Now, if there's a recovery, we'll talk about this at the end, and they give you some ideas on that website I mentioned about putting them into a recovery position. It's on the side, we'll talk about it at the end. You put them in the recovery position if there's been a response, and you check them regularly and call for help. However, if there is no response, you call for help now. Now, of course, we know the 000 number. If anyone has ever used it, you know they'll go police, ambulance, fire. You choose who you want. If you're out of a network coverage, then you can use the mobile international number, the 112 number. People say you can get an app on your phone which will tell you how to go through things, and that's excellent. However, it's really good to have that ambulance on the end of the phone. They are like that app. They will go through what do you need to do next, and they can talk you through it, because in a state of panic, it's hard to remember everything. So the other thing, when you are calling the ambulance, please, they are excellent in getting there, but please give them the most information you can, suburb, cross street, city even, just so that they know exactly how to get there. The thing they've answered last is a send for help. Now, if you've been lucky enough to get the ambulance on your phone, that's fine. You don't need to send for help. That's basically for someone that you can't, say you're down in a valley, there's no network connection, you have to send someone up a mountain, get them to get help, and then come back to you. Thank you. Okay, so what usually happens if someone has had an accident, they're like this, their head's down, their chin's down on their chest. And I'll just show with my friend, if their chin is way down on their chest, the airway isn't going to be open. Can't get any air in. So we need our airway to be open. So first of all, what we do is we look in their mouth. Is there anything there that could be blocking the air getting through? Blood, saliva, a foreign body, anything like that. Now, if you can see something there, and only if you can see something there, we roll them to the side. When we're rolling them, we keep their head in alignment with their backbone. We roll them to the side, and just gently with a little finger, we scoop it out. Now, this is not the major archaeological dig, and the reason people only do it if they see something there is because in the past people used to get so enthusiastic about trying to scrape to get anything out that they used to scrape the inside of the mouth, used to swell up and reduce the airway. So this is, if you see something there, try and get it out by scraping it out, and we'll talk about in our next session in the first aid and choking what to do if we can't get it out. If they are drowning, then we put them directly on their side in that recovery position so that the water can drain out. Now, for an airway to work, that's great. For an airway to work, we have to have an open airway. You've heard about people swallowing their tongue. They don't actually swallow their tongue, but their tongue is attached to this lower jaw here. So if the lower jaw falls back, the tongue falls back and it blocks the entrance to the airway. So we want the tongue and the lower jaw forward so our airway is open. So, and if you look at that CPR training for kids, they will show you what we want to do is move this chin up to keep the tongue forward, to keep our airway open. Two ways of doing it. One, we can put the heel of our hand on the forehead, with a little grip on the bony part of our chin, not the soft part underneath, but the bony part of the chin, we pull our chin up. Now, the position we want for anyone under 12 months is that flat, neutral position, and for anyone over 12 months, we want a slight sniffing near position. I'm just going to show you in terms of getting air in, what happens. As I said, if it's way down here, we can't do it. If it's way back, we need a slightly slightly neutral, neutral area to make sure that the air can get in. Now, you're going to say, what happens if we don't want to move the neck around? Very sensible. What the other way we can maneuver, we can do, and I can't do it on this doll, is what's called the jaw thrust. So basically, we just thrust the lower jaw forward. The way to do that, if you can feel under your ears, there's a straight bit of bone in your lower jaw going straight down, and then it comes forward to the angle of your chin. If you just put 2 fingers on that straight bit of bone under your ears and you push it forward, it pushes the jaw forward, it pushes the tongue forward, but it doesn't move the neck around. And that's what we do if we're worried about a possible neck injury. Now, with them in a good position, we're going to check the breathing. And this is something that all parents are experts at, because in the middle of the night, in the half light, we creep next to our baby's cot and we go, are they breathing? And we all do it. And we do exactly the same thing now. We are going to look, listen and feel for 10 seconds. So we're looking. Can we see their chest and their tummy moving? Can we hear and feel air coming out of their mouth and nose? And if you're not sure, as it coming out, you can put a little mirror there and see whether you can get fogs up to see if the air is coming out. So what we are looking and listening for is normal breathing. Babies breathe faster than we do, so in that 10 seconds, for anyone under 12 months, we want 5 normal breaths. For adults and children, we don't breathe quite as fast, so somewhere about 2 to 3, up to 4 breaths in that. But what we want is normal breathing. So we don't want the sigh. We want gasp, a gurgle, or very occasional breaths. If there is no normal breathing, if they're not breathing at all, or if they are doing that gasping, gurgling kind of breathing, then we need to start CPR. C, cardio, heart, P, pulmonary, resuscitation. Next one, thanks. So, looking at the C part of it, the compressions, people in the past used to check for a pulse, and if you are trained and experienced in doing it, I'll go through how to do it, but if not, I'll give you another pathway, which is probably a little easier. So if you're feeling for a pulse, again, it's the 10-second rule. We need to feel for 10 seconds, and we need to feel for a major blood vessel. So for children and adults, we can feel the carotid, which is this big one coming up here, not to the neck, goes up to the ear, you go halfway along and you can feel there. Remember, when you're feeling for a pulse, you're using your second and third finger or index and middle fingers, because there is a pulse in your thumb, which will be going like this by this time. You want to feel their pulse. You feel for 10 seconds. When you are feeling, you are blocking off that blood vessel. So you only do it on one side of the neck because you want the blood on the other side of the neck to go and circulate around. So you're feeling for the pulse. Now, the problem you will tell me with little babies is no neck, really hard to find. So in a baby, you can feel either the one in between the muscles here, or a nice big one is in their leg, going from their trunk to their leg. So if you divide where their trunk meets their leg into an inner third, middle third, outer third, that junction of that inner and middle third, nice big pulse there. Again, we feel for 10 seconds. However, if you aren't experienced and you want to have a good idea, do they need, what's happening, then look at them. And sometimes ambulance say, do they look dreadful? Dreadful, where they're not moving, they're not responding, they're not breathing. When you touch them, they are pale, cold and clammy. They are turning blue around their nails, fingernails, their toenails and around their mouth. Whatever their heart's doing, it's not doing a good enough job. And another objective measure you can do is what's called capillary refill. Now, provided you don't have nail polish on, you can check it on yourself. Usually our capillaries are our smallest blood vessels. This is where the oxygen goes from our lungs and our blood into our tissues and the carbon dioxide comes out. So usually if we're looking at a nail, if we push it, it goes pale, and if we let it go, it comes back within 3 seconds. So if it's not coming back within 3 seconds, it is called poor capillary refill. Now suppose you've measured a pulse and it's only going very slowly, less than 60. even at that time, you would start your cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I'm just going to go through it and then I'm going to give a demonstration. So when you are wanting to pump your heart is like a bag of blood. That's sort of the left side of the chest here. And we want to push this breastbone here between the notch of the neck to where the ribs meet towards our backbone. So to do that, we need to have them on a hard surface. So this table's fine, the floor's fine, but their bed will have the springs underneath. I know in the movies they'll be resuscitated on a bed or a couch, but it's not going to happen in real life. So even in the hospital, they will put a plank of wood under them to make sure they can do the resuscitation. So what we want to do is we want to push the top of the lower half of the breastbone. And the breastbone goes from the notch of the neck here to where the ribs meet. So we just here. So we find where it is, and we put our fingers at the top of the lower half. Now you say to me, why don't we just go all the way down? Wouldn't that be easier? Yes, easier. Unfortunately, right at the bottom of this bar of bone is a little knob of bone called the xiphisternum or the xiphoid process, and it's only attached by a bit of cartilage. So most people it sticks in, some people sticks out. If you press on it, it can break off, and that's why we no longer do the Heimlich maneuver for choking, because it was used to cause too much damage. With someone who's over 12 months, it's pretty easy to find. Look at the notch of the neck here, look where the ribs meet here, and divide up. Put your fingers at the top of the lower half. However, for someone under 12 months, the little easy ready reckoner is put your fingers on the nipple line, and it's the 2 fingers below that. Now I'm saying 2 fingers because under whatever the force you need, whether depending how strong that you are and how bulky they are, is we want to move this breastbone down 1/3 the width of this chest. When I'm giving the demonstration, I'm not going to go that far, because I can break the doll. It's happened before. So, but when you go to that website I told you about, you can have a practice seeing how far down it is. So we're saying 2 fingers for an infant. Some people also say you can use 2 thumbs, and you can see that up on the screen. The trouble with this is you can't move from doing this to the breathing, which you can do if you're just using your 2 fingers. So you need to have someone else doing the breathing. And usually if you're lucky enough to have 2 people doing it, then what we say is one person does both the compressions and the breathing for a cycle of 5, which is about 2 minutes, and then the next person takes on. So 2 fingers for anyone under 12 months, but depends if, this is going to be rugby player, and you might need a bit more force. So the next force you use is your heel of your hand with your fingers up. If you need more, you put your other hand on top. And anyone who remembers doing it on an adult, you're kneeling next to them, locking your shoulders, locking your elbows, and just rocking back and forth, putting all your body weight on to try and compress it. Now, people also say, but what if I break a rib? It depends on how flexible they are and how strong their bones are. But if you break a rib by doing it and you're pumping their chest to keep them alive, then that rib will mend probably in about 6 weeks. So it also depends. Babies and children have much more flexible skeletons than we do, so it's harder to break it. Then adults, our bones tend to be a bit more brittle, and it's more easy to break it. But again, it's that force of moving that breastbone down 1/3 the width of this chest. That's what you need to do. And if you break a bone, it will mend later on. Go on. Now, in terms of compressions, this has changed a little bit in the last few years. It used to be a rate for babies and a rate for everyone else. Then they changed to a common rate for everyone, which was 100 compressions in a minute. Now, in the last few years, they've changed that to 100 to 120 compressions in a minute. And so that's 2 a second. That's pretty fast. If you're wondering how you're going to try and remember it, 2 university students with probably a little bit too much time on their hands analysed all the popular music, and they came up with 2 that sort of fitted the bill. One was a good old Queen song, another one, Bites the Dust. Don't know about you, but if you are doing resuscitation and you're singing another one, Bites the Dust, it mightn't quite be the image you want to do. So if you can remember, the other one was the John Travolta, Bee Gees, Saturday Night Fever, Staying Alive. This is what you're doing for your compressions. You are keeping them alive. So if you can hum them, please you don't want me to sing. But if you can hum in your head, staying alive, that will give you the right rhythm to go with. I've also been told Baby Shark works too, but I know everyone's too traumatized that I won't mention it anymore. When you are doing this, remember it isn't just a tap on top, it is a firm compression down and letting them come up, firm down. Because when you push down, it pushes the blood towards the brain. When you let it come up with a smooth recoil, the blood vessels around the heart fill, and this keeps the heart alive. Again, it is going straight down, a third the depth of the chest. I can give you centimetres, but you're not going to get out your little measuring tape and say, am I doing it long enough? Just remember, if you can do it a third the width of the depth of that chest, that is going to be the right one. The ratio for anyone, adult or child, out in the community is we do 2 breaths to 30 compressions. I'm going to come back and do a demonstration in a few moments. In a hospital setting, for an adult, they will still do 2 breaths to 30 compressions, but in a pediatric, a child setting, they will do 2 breaths to 15 compressions. The reason for that is for adults, it's more likely to be our heart that needs the support. For children, more likely we need more respiratory support. However, in the setting, in a community, in a hospital setting, they have lots of resources and lots of people to do it. In a community setting, it is really too difficult to try and do 2 to 15. The 2 to 30 will be fine. Now, usually, as I said, if you're lucky enough to have 2 people to do it, then you continue, one person does what's called continuous CPR. So one person does the 30 compressions, 2 breaths. I'm coming back to it in a moment for the demonstration. 5 times, 2 minutes, and then the next person takes on. In the past, people would be told to do it for a minute and then check. But they'd spend so much time checking that the person wasn't getting the support they needed. So what we said to do is instead just do it continuously. And will I know when they wake up? Yes. They'll cough, they'll splutter, they'll vomit, you will know. So you don't need to do the checking all the time. Okay, so just talking briefly about the breathing, and again, as I said, I just want to reinforce, this is if you feel comfortable doing it, so you don't need to feel like you have to do it. It is expired air, breathing out air resuscitation. So what we need to do is we can put our mouth over their mouth and nose, if we can fit a good seal. If we can't, we just put our mouth over their mouth. Now we're breathing air in, and so what will happen is the air will try and find the quickest way out, which is going out the nose. So if you're just putting your mouth over their mouth, remember you need to pinch off their nose, because otherwise the air will come out that way, and we want the air to go in their mouth and come down. Okay, suppose that they've smashed their face. We don't really want to put our mouth on their mouth. We can close up their mouth and put our mouth on their nose and breathe in that way. But again, the same thing, we have to close up one so the air goes down. If you're lucky enough to have a mask, then remember for anyone over 12 months, the point goes to the nose. It has a little written on it. However, if they're under 12 months, we reverse it so the point goes to their chin. What we try and do is do breaths to try, we have to keep their airway open, so we have to make sure it's like this. We have to have a good seal. And we try and imitate the rate that the person breathes. As we said, babies and children breathe faster than we do. So we want to do a 1 breath over about 3 seconds. So we take a little bit in our mouth before we put our mouth on, because we want to get the freshest air for them. Rather than from the depths of our lungs where it's already gone around our body and it's had a lot less oxygen in it. We want to do, so we breathe in over a minute, we take our mouth off so that we can see the chest going down, and we can take a fresh breath. It's very tempting when you really get a really good seal that you keep your mouth there. The trouble is it's just rebreathing the same air. The amount we give is just enough to make the chest rise. When I give this demonstration, it's going to be more than that because I want to make sure you can see it. But as soon as you see that chest rise, that's when you stop. For a baby, just what's in our cheeks usually, and for anyone who's tried on one of those adult mannequins, it is big breath to get it up. Now, this is a case when more isn't better. If you put in too much more, two things can happen. One, too much air goes down into our lungs. Now, our respiratory tree, our breathing apparatus is like an upside down tree. Big trunk here with our larynx and our trachea divides into smaller branches in the lungs. Right at the end are little leaves, which are like our air sacs alveoli, which are like leaves. If we put too much pressure in, they will pop. Also, if we put too much air in, then rather than going down into our larynx and the big trunk here, it'll go down into the tube next to it, which is our gullet or esophagus, which goes to our stomach. So our stomach blows up with air. This means the diaphragm between our chest and our tummy gets pushed and can't move as easily. And also, if there's acid in our stomach, it can come back up and go into our lungs and cause an inflammation and pneumonitis. So what I'm going to do is, if we can just go back to that demonstration, to keep going. Perfect. I'm going to give a demonstration now before we go on. Okay. And as I said, I will breathe a little bit more. I can't get my mouth over this mouth and nose, so I'm going to pinch off the nose, holding the jaw forward. 3, nipple line. 1, 2. Now, I've done 30, but what if I got confused and I couldn't quite remember what I was singing up when I was up to? Then that isn't a big priority. It's far better that you do something than you go, oh, I can't quite remember if you do 23 or if you do 35. It's still going to be good to keep this person going. And as I said, I didn't push quite as far as I needed to because I don't want to break. So now, how long do you do it for? If you only have one person doing it, then you do it. You do it until you do it until you can't do it anymore. You do it until they wake up and respond, or you do it until the ambulance arrives. I was giving this talk quite a while ago to a new mothers group, and this lady said her friend had just had a baby too. As a adolescent, this friend had fallen into a dam in Western New South Wales. Her friends had resuscitated her for 6 hours and she recovered well. So the story is, it's amazing, but the younger we are, unfortunately over 25, all downhill guys, but the younger we are, then the better we are going to respond in terms of rewiring and things like that. So you do it until they wake, until you can't do it anymore, until the ambulance turns up. What if you've had no help? You've got no one with you, can't send anyone from help, then just do it for a minute and go for help then. So we're going to talk about now what else can we do. Now, there is called automatic external defibrillation, AED. Most people will have seen them. There are lots around council centres, shopping centres, airports, bus stations, cinemas, anywhere there's a lot of people, there's going to be an AED. They're about this big. They're usually near the information desk. They are really a really valuable asset, especially for adults, but we use them with children as well. Anyone who has done a course will have had a practice on one and will recognise that they are not subtle. You turn them on and they will yell at you about what to do. There are a few things they don't mention. So if someone has collapsed, please get someone to go and bring it to you rather than trying to drag the person there, of course. What they don't mention is caution about water. Now, water and electricity, not a good mix. So if there's any water, you may need to move them to somewhere where they're dry. You will need to expose their chest. This will involve removing the bra. Remember, underwire bras, removing jewellery. And for guys, remember they often keep their mobile in their back pocket and that will get fried. When you open it up, they'll also have a shaver there. This is for if someone has thick hair, you have to do a little bit of manscaping because otherwise the pads won't fit. The pads will tell you where to fit. There are two types of pads. There are children's pads, pediatric pads, if the child is under 15 kilos. Otherwise, you will use the adult pads. But there is something you have to be very careful of. Usually the pads go here and here. You can't have them touching or close enough for an arc to go between. So if it is a small child or the pads are bigger for the child, then you can put one on the front and one on the back. The pads, it's wonderful, but it doesn't take away from your CPR. So while you are doing your CPR, when you go from the compressions to the breathing, that's when someone puts the pads on. Then when everything's attached, you have to stand back because it will assess the rhythm of the person who needs the defibrillation. Not all rhythms can be zapped, so it will tell you. You don't have to look at the funny squiggles on the monitor. It will tell you whether it can be zapped or not. So if it it measures. Then you go back and continue doing your breathing and your CPR until it says this is one that can be zapped. You build up the charge and then you stand back and discharge it into the person. Then you come back and have to do it for another 2 minutes because then you stand back and it checks again to see whether it's worked. So it is a wonderful device, but you can't just go, oh good, it's on. You have to keep on doing things to make sure before it can work and to see whether it's worked. Okay, so we're now going to talk about adults. We're going to talk about the danger, the response, the send for help. We're going to open the airway and clear the airway if we need to. Now, depending on who this adult is, depends on what you are happy to do. Again, giving this talk a year or two ago, this woman told me about her father, who in the 80s, as a GP, had resuscitated someone at the airport and then got on his plane and went off with his family for his family holiday. He and another doctor, actually. When the victim woke up, he said, I'm HIV positive. And I'd heard the story. We'd all heard this story. We all thought it was one of those urban myths. She said, no, it wasn't an urban myth. It was her dad it happened to. But he and the other doctor, neither of them got HIV. But I'm just saying, you have no idea if it's a stranger in the street, what they might have, and they won't want to give anything to you. And there's hepatitis, there's all lots of other things around. So if you don't feel comfortable doing it, that's fine. What you can do is the cardio, heart, cerebral, brain resuscitation. So that is just doing the compressions. So you'll be doing exactly the same rate as you will do before. Singing in your head, you're staying alive. You don't have to count to 30. You just keep on going. However, if you are happy to do the breathing as well, then it's the same ratio as before we talked about. So it is 30 compressions to the 2 breaths. Keep on going till they wake up. But remember, a defibrillator is a really useful thing, especially for adults. Now, we're just going to talk about our recovery position. There are lots of ways to get in the recovery position, but unfortunately this doll won't do any of them. So it's also called the lateral, which is a side position. And I don't know about anyone else. When I was giving birth to my first child, I had to lie on my left side. That is because if you lie on your left side, the blood coming back to the heart is easier. So if someone is pregnant or possibly pregnant, then we always usually roll them to their left side because that is the easiest way for the blood to get back to the heart. We usually cross one foot over the other, and when we do it, I like the way where they actually have this hand going all the way around the neck, so you can keep the neck in alignment with the backbone when you roll over. But if you're lucky enough to have more than one person, you log roll them over. When they're over in that position, you need to make sure their jaw is forward so that open so that if they vomit, it's going to come out. When we put them in the recovery position is when they're breathing, when their heart's going. If not, you're still doing your CPR until that happens. Then you can put them in that position, but you have to check them regularly. You have to check, are they still continuing to breathe? Is their heart still going? And also consider where you're rolling them onto, because if it's gravel, cut glass, things like that, you must be careful where you're actually putting them, and considering leaving them 45 minutes would be the most amount of time you want to actually leave them there. If they've got lots of fractures and you don't really want to move them, then packing around the fractures and just keep making sure their breathing is going along might be an easy way to manage them. Now that's the end of this section. So if there are any questions, please type them in and we can go through them before we have a 5-minute break. Hi everyone, we're back. We've taken it off the big screen, so hopefully that won't give the lag that you had before, but please let us know. There was a question in the break about the 50% up and down. What I'm saying is when you press down, you don't do a sharp release like that. You do a smooth up and down, so that it's not just a push down and then let go. It is smooth up, smooth down, to try and get, as I said, the time for the blood vessels around the heart to fill up when you are letting it go. I hope that answers the question all right. Okay, we're just going to start on the first aid. We also have given you a sheet about a flow chart about what to do with choking, so that I'm going to talk around that, but I'm not going to actually bring up that sheet. So that's an extra resource for you to have. There we are. Now we're going to be talking about choking, some drowning and near drowning, burns, including sunburn, some poisons and accidental ingestions, and also some bites and stings. Why we talk about accidents? Yes, accidents do happen. Your 2 children collide on the basketball field, they're going to hurt themselves. Things like that we can't prevent. But when we're talking about accidents, we're particularly concerned about the little ones, the 0 to 4-year-old age group, because they can't protect themselves and we have to protect them. Accidents in this age not only can cause injury, they can cause death. And these little people are much too precious. So we're going to talk about what to do when it happens, but also how to prevent it. So we'll just move on. When we talk about choking, we think the highest risk is usually in that toddler and preschool age group, because they still explore the world by putting things in their mouths. That is everything except something you spend 3 hours cooking because they liked it at childcare. That gets spat out, but everything else, they explore it by putting it in their mouths. Saying that, in the first 6 months of life, there's a lot of incoordination between their swallowing and their breathing. And you might have experienced this yourself. Sometimes when you feed them, rather than going down their gullet, esophagus into their stomach, it comes out their nose. Or sometimes it goes down the tube next to their esophagus, their larynx, and they'll start to that's very common. Often, sometimes they get hiccups as well, which is the other thing that happens. That usually lasts in the first 6 months of life. If something does go into the airway, usually like 99.9% of the time, it blocks it off partially. And we can tell what to do with each one. Now, if something goes into the airway, the child will cough, trying to clear it out. Coughing is a really good way of clearing. Our body's really good at doing this. They'll try to cry, but they won't be able to make a sound. Also make that really weird in-breathing sound. Any obstruction above our chest will give a in-breathing sound. Any obstruction to our airway in our chest will give an out-breathing sound, like an asthma. If they are completely blocked, they will turn blue and collapse, and we'll tell you what to do about that. So if we just move to the next slide. Okay, so if someone is choking, allow them, and coughing, allow them to cough, because our body is really good at protecting ourselves. So we sit them up, we reassure them, cough with mummy, that's good. Now, try and keep calm. It is really hard, I know, when they're anxious, but if you get anxious, they get anxious. And I'm afraid it doesn't stop. My daughter, when she went for her driver's license recently, her words of wisdom to me when we got in the car for her test was, do not get anxious or you'll make me anxious. So try and keep calm. Cough with mummy, that's good. And that's usually all we need to do. I know it seems like it's going on for minutes and hours, but usually it's only a few seconds. What do we do next if they can't clear it? Or if their cough goes from that vigorous to I can't make any more of it. Well, people say, I hear you just hold them upside down and hit them on the back. The idea of gravity is good. The idea of getting a burst of air to dislodge whatever's there is good, but the finesse isn't good. So please, we ring up an ambulance to make sure someone's on our way to help, and we try and if they are still breathing, we try and dislodge it. Now, holding their jaw in a neutral position, so we can hold it down, head down. I'm afraid I'm going to have to stand up a little bit for this, because we either put them along our arm, we can put them along our leg, or if they're bigger, we can go over our lap like this, or if they're even bigger, and we'll show on a slide, we can put them on the side like this to do it, or we can get them sitting in a chair, or standing up. What we want to do is, using a bit of gravity, holding their jaw in neutral, give a burst of air by hitting them with the heel of our hand between their shoulder blades. Now, this is you're not going to be called on by docs for beating up your child, so don't get worried. What we're going to try and do is, we've checked to see if we can actually get any foreign body out, and if we can, gentle little finger to try and get it out. If we can't get it out, then we try and dislodge it like this. So imagine this child is on my lap, I'm holding it, downward head position, heel of my hand, I'm going to do a burst of air to try and dislodge whatever's there. We do these back blows, we do 5 of them, they're 1 a second, so they're slower than ones we did before, and after each one, we checked to see if anything has come out. Remember, they're like this. If they're babies, then we can turn them over like this, and again, do on that lower part of the breastbone another thrust. We only do it up to 12 months, and after each one, we again check. Anyone older than that, or if you're not feeling comfortable turning them over, it's fine to just keep on with the back blows. We do the 5, we check each time, and we check to see if it's dislodged. We look at them and then we repeat them. Now, if someone is unconscious, turned blue, collapsed, we do what we did before. We're going to start our CPR. We're going to breathe for them. So we're going to see if there's anything there and get rid of it if we can. If we can't, then we're going to breathe around it. And people say, but if we're breathing around it, it's there. Sometimes what happens is we can move it down a little bit. And as I said, big trunk of a tree, branches into each side of the lungs. It might move into one side and the other side might be able to keep breathing. So we try and breathe around it if they are stopped breathing and collapsed. We actually talked about this. Go on again. And these are just some demonstrations of how you can do it. We can go on again. Okay, so what are we going to try and think about how we can prevent it? Now, food is a big culprit. If you actually Google and see foreign body and lungs, it'll be usually a piece of carrot or a peanut. So let's try and think how we can make them safe. We're talking about making some mealtime rules, and this is to start off when they're babies as well, until the age of, as soon as they can move around, they're active, they're moving, until they get to about 14 and then they don't move at all. Before that time, they're like they're on a trampoline. If you get them sitting down, they're less likely to breathe food in the wrong way. And even if they are sitting down, make sure that they are hyping each other up. It doesn't have to be like a morgue at meal times, but try and make sure they're keeping a lid on it so they're not hyping each other up. If they laugh, they're likely to breathe it in the wrong way. The other thing is these supervising eyes are wonderful. Because children can be very creative where they put their food. They can put it in their ears, up their nose. DVD player doesn't work too well after that. So just supervising them and keeping them calm down is going to be a good way of making sure they don't put things in odd places and choke on. The next thing is what kind of foods can we do? As I said, peanuts, especially, are an ideal shape to get lodged. So under the age of 5, please don't use the whole nuts. Grating apples, carrots when we first start off so they can't breathe them in. There are other things we can do. Now, small bones in fish, chicken, things like that, they can easily go down. But there are also things like the skin around sausages, and I'm talking particularly about those little cocktail frankfurts. We're talking about seeds. Now, seeds in watermelons. You can get seedless watermelon. You can get seedless grapes. You can get seedless mandarins. Make life easy for yourself. But remember, even things like grapes, very small children, you need to be able to peel it so that they won't choke on it. And I've heard of blueberries, an ideal shape. So even cutting up the blueberries is important. The other thing is sushi. because kids have trouble biting into that black seaweed that goes around it, often cutting it up is a good idea so you're not going to have to pull it out of their lungs. Next culprit is toys. Now, I know anyone who's got a child probably feels like they could open a toy shop. Check what you've got. Australian manufacturing standards say not suitable for children under 3, contain small parts. They also have another sort of thing that says use under adult supervision. And you think, but it's a toy, but when you look at it, there might be buttons on dresses or beads on eyes or something like that. Because if it becomes loose, and they've loosened it with their little fingers, they're now going to explore it by putting it in their mouths. If you have got secondhand toys that don't have those regulations on them, or you've bought them from a Fate, which are beautiful toys, but they haven't gone through that manufacturer's supervision, have a look yourself to see, is there anything there? You know, perhaps they've got button eyes that you can just put a bit of thread in there instead, something to make it safer. The other thing is trying to keep toys outside a baby's bassinet because little faces can bury into it. Also, when they wake up in the morning, they can use their little fingers to explore it, comes loose, put it in their mouths. But other things are culprits as well, like plastic bags, love putting them over their heads. Pins, nails, bread ties, these are all things that they love playing mummy and daddy. And so if you are doing some sewing and put some pins in your mouth, you've just given them an example what to do when you found a pin or a bread tie. Coins, kids love to think of themselves as money boxes, but you know, it isn't related to that. Styrofoam beans, beanbag fillings, bottle caps, etc. Ones that are coming up more recently are the button batteries. They're nice and shiny, and also the dishwashing tablets because they look like they've got a lolly in the middle of them. So these are all things we have to think about. What do we demonstrate to our children when we're using them, but also how can we put them away safely so that the kids can't get at them. So this is a time when you need to go to your local hardware store, look at the child's safety devices. You can get locks, either a magnet, so you can open drawers, you can put in a lever which you have to push down to open a drawer. It tends to be adult-proof as well as child-proof. You can get little plugs to go into power points, makes them a lot safer. You can get gates so kids can't go down things. So, and anything that's going to be dangerous, lock it away. The other thing I put there is blind cords and dummies. The dummy is with a long string, can go around, but the blind cords, and you can't see, that hang down, kids have been known to jump between them and choke themselves on them. So tape them together so kids can't get into them, or tape them up so they can't get into them. When we talk about drowning, again, we're talking about the littlies. We're talking about the 1, 2, and 3-year-olds. And amazingly, although we tend to think of kids coming in from outside, 60% of them, it happens in their own home, and most of the rest of the 40% are in friends or relatives' places. So these are kids who either live there or have been invited there. But you only need this much water, so bath tubs, if your kid's in the bath, please supervise them. Creeks, watering systems, things like that. In terms of prevention, it's great to teach children to swim, and I thoroughly advocate it in our country. But what a child will do in a swimming lesson may be different from what they do in a swimming pool when they get scared. Also, so the idea is basically if a kid is near water, you need to be supervising them, whether they're in the water or not. Kids have no fear. There are lovely swans and unicorns and things like that floating in the pool. If they go in, they go down quietly. We have a pool at home, and one of my friend's younger sons, he was 5, he had been swimming in swimming lessons from the age of 2. He got out of his depth, he went down. We just were on right next to him and pulled him out. But really, as I said, if kids get scared, they won't necessarily translate their swimming lessons to what's happened before. The other thing to remember is with lots of those swans and flamingos and everything in pools, kids can get caught underneath. So that's why you need to be around, just keeping an eye and checking that you can count all the heads. Barriers are great, and they are essential. They're part of Australian standards. However, I know children who even 2 and 3 can scale pool barriers without using any, stools or chairs. And you've probably seen them on videos on YouTube and things like that. So really, a barrier is great, but it doesn't take away from just being there and supervising. Also remember, if pools get slippery, then the kids can go in, they can knock their head as they're going in, or they can slip in unintentionally. Learn to swim is great, but it doesn't take away from the supervision. There is a really good system from the Department of Sport and Recreation. They run 9-day intensive swimming courses. The first thing they do is to teach them how to get out of the water. And on the last day, the 9th day, they come with their swimmers on and they come with clothes over the top so they can learn how to get out of the water with wet clothes. By law, you have to have resuscitation notice by the pool, so that will give you a bit of an idea what to do. Now, assess them, get them out of the water. When you are carrying the child, carry the head lower than chest to try and drain anything out. Call an ambulance. These children need to get to hospital. If they spark up, they can go up and then down. So they need to go to hospital. When you are assessing them, again, in that recovery position so that the water can drain out. And as I mentioned in the previous session, if there is a risk of, if they've dived into shallow water and hit their head, a risk of a spinal injury. So just be very aware when you're putting them on the side that you keep their head and backbone in alignment. Now, this is something that sounds a little bit counterintuitive. You take off the wet clothing and you cover them with a blanket, but you keep them slightly cool. I'm not talking about morgue slab cold, but cool. The reason for that is our basal metabolic rate, our rate at which everything occurs in our body, depends on how hot we are. So if someone is hotter, their basal metabolic rate is faster. And if they have had a little bit areas of brain that haven't had as much oxygen, it's likely to break down quicker. If we keep them cooler, then things are slower and things will not break down as quickly. You may need to resuscitate them exactly the same as we said before. As soon as you see their chest rise, that's when you stop, but their lungs can be soggier and harder to expand if they've got water in them. If they are breathing, put them in the recovery position. Now, talking about burns, this is something Australia is a gold standard at in terms of our sunburn, but also how it predicts getting skin cancers when we're older. And it is our early exposure that will predict it. 2/3 of the people who have spent their childhood or adolescence in Australia will develop some kind of skin cancer by the time they're in their 60s and 70s. I'm not talking about nasty melanomas, but I'm talking about the solar keratosis, squamous cell, basal cell carcinoma. So it is our early exposure we have to be really careful of. Yes, we think about it in summer, but there's also the snow glare, but also the water glare. You can get an app for this that comes from the Cancer Council to tell you what the UV rating is. Because often you can't tell. It could be a cloudy day, but a high UV rating. So what can we do? We can be careful about the time of the day we go out. So the ultraviolet radiation is higher in the middle of the day. Now that's between 11 and 3, or if we're talking about daylight saving time, 10 and 2. We can also use ways to protect ourselves. Now I'm going to talk about sunscreens. 2 types of sunscreens. There's one that absorb the rays and one that reflect the rays. I like the ones that reflect. It's a physical barrier. It is gooier, but it means that the rays get bounced off. And that's like a zinc or a titanium dioxide. I do not have shares in the Cancer Council, but they have some excellent sunscreens. They have some wonderful ones for sensitive skin. And I really would suggest, if you can keep them out of the sun without getting sunburned, fine. But we know that the sunscreens haven't caused any problem, but we know sunburn does. Because as soon as they get sunburned, not only is their cells swell, they've also had enough ultraviolet radiation to damage the genetic material inside the cells. So when you're talking about sunscreens, as I said, make sure you put enough on. Choice Magazine did an expose a few years ago. So the fact you pay more for it doesn't make it a better sunscreen, but it's really important to put enough on. Don't use the sprays. They don't give enough coverage. You need at least 5 mils per arm. It's a teaspoon. 5 mils on your face, 5 mils front, 5 mils back, 5 mils per leg. Remember, it takes 20 minutes to work. So you need to make sure it's on before you get to the beach. I know most of us pack it and put it on when we're at the beach, but then they're being exposed for 20 minutes without having that protection. and reapply it frequently. What else can we do? We can use long sleeve and long pants clothing. If you are doing that, I would suggest a fabric that breathes, like a natural fibre rather than a synthetic. You can use a broad brimmed hat. We need at least 8 centimetres for an adult, 6 centimetres for a child, and the children, often that Legionnaires is a great idea. Now, this is something that you can model. If wearing a hat is what you do, then they're more likely to do it. However, there is that 8 to 9 month stage where they take their hat off. Frequently, just put it back on, because when they're at childcare or when they're at school, there is a no hat, no play policy. Sunglasses. Why I'm saying sunglasses, again, the Cancer Council, it also has excellent rash shirts and swimmers. So I would suggest those as well. But it has good sunglasses and little carriers for them. However, before the age of 3, you probably need super glue to keep it on, and I would advocate super glue. Why we suggest sunglasses is because this is another thing Australia's very good at. Cataracts are the cloudiness in the lenses in our eyes, and it is ultraviolet radiation that does it. So again, over the age of 55, Australians each year get more and more Australians each year, as they get older, get more cataracts and the cloudiness of our vision. So if you can protect it by protecting against the ultraviolet radiation, that's good. We can also use umbrellas and tents, and remember to move as the sun changes direction. If someone is burnt like any other burns, we need to treat it. We need cool, moist compresses. We need rest. We need pain relief because it's very painful. Remember, lots of fluids, any creams. Now, anything that is severe, go up to the hospital or the doctor to see if they need it. When we're talking about other kinds of burns and scalds, this is when we need to think of protection from our local hardwares of how we can keep our kids safe. So lots of things we can do that are quite easy. Anything that is flammable, matches, lighters, kerosene, lock them away. If we are talking about things like kettles, jugs, teapots, keep them and their cords out of reach. They're pretty good these days. If we're talking about things that go on a table, make sure there isn't a tablecloth, because little ones will crawl up, pull what's on top of them and pull it down on top of themselves. Giving this talk a few years ago, and this woman told me about her neighbour whose little one was about 9 months, just started to crawl, pull themselves up on the ironing board as the iron came across. For me, good enough just not to iron, that's fine. But if you do need to iron, people have ironed inside the playpen with the child on the outside, iron when they're asleep, and get a coiler so that the cord doesn't hang down. First thing, if not ironing is probably working worse for me. But if you're having a hot drink, don't have your child in your lap, or little hand will go up and push the hot drink all over them. If you are cooking, make sure you turn the pan handle away from the side of the stove so a little hand can't reach up and put it on top. You can get a railing around your stove so that they can't reach it. If you are thinking of a bath, if you have a common spout coming out, make sure you turn off the hot and let the spout go cold with the cold water, so if they touch it, they don't burn. In terms of sleepwear, by law, they have to have a risk of flammability on the sleepwear. They can still sell it. So if it is, say, a pink for a little number with nylon, it's going to be high flammability. Often the t-shirts, shorts, track pants, even though they're made of cotton, which is flammable, they aren't likely to get likely to burst into flames because they're quite snug fitting. Okay, what do we do? And as I said, that CPR training for parents.org.au has some ideas about burns. They ask you to teach the child to stop, cover their face and drop. The kids have to be probably about 6 to 8 at least to be able to do that. What we want to do is remove the heat source. So we can smother them, we can roll them on the ground with a blanket, water. Now, if they have clothes covered with hot fluid and it's a small amount and you can easily get it off, please do. If it's a large amount, it's likely to stick to the skin, then just wash over the top of it because we don't want to rip too much skin off. What we do now is cold running water for at least 20 minutes, but usually between 60 and 90 minutes. It works in 2 ways, and you probably have experienced this when you've used those cold sprays, sports sprays. The cold activates the cold fibres which go into our brain. I was telling tell us cold, pain and cold travel in the same nerve fibres. So if the cold is activated, there's going to be less pain fibres getting through, so it isn't as painful. If you were somewhere out in the bush or had a friend who burnt her hand on a baking tray, you can use something called Burn Aid, you buy from the chemist, or hydrogel is the other name for it. And she reckoned it worked better than cold water. I personally think the second glass of champagne she had when she was taking it probably worked just as well. But if you're out somewhere and you don't have cold water, take your hydrogel with you, because that's going to be another good way of treating burns. If you can do without having the cold water on your burn, then please, the skin is now raw, all the bugs floating around in the air can land on it. So you need to cover it, clean cloth, like Glad wrap, something like that, but a loose covering, not gripped onto it. Please don't use ice packs, and because they get too cold. Now, anything over the size of your little person's hand or bigger than a 20-cent piece needs to go up to the doctor or the hospital. Even smaller than that if it's on their face, if it's on their hands or their feet or on their genitals. Face because of cosmetic-wise, hands and feet because if the burn then heals, it often scars and reduces the flexibility of the hands and feet, and the genitals because it is incredibly sore. Poisonings. Now, we tend to think of 2-year-olds, the 2 and 3-year-old, again, exploring the world by putting everything in their mouth. And we tend to think of medicines, and 2/3 of them are medicines, but 1/3 of those household chemicals. So locking away all your medicines is important, but also locking away all your household chemicals. Most people are pretty good at it, but it's when things are out of whack. They've got a new baby, they're moving house, that's when it's more likely to happen. But remember, if you visit grandparents or older people, the only way they can remember to have their medicines is to have it out on the table in front of them, and they look like lollies. And even if they're in a childproof container, 5-year-olds can open childproof containers. So the only safe thing to do is to lock everything away. Now, if your child has taken something, or you think they've taken something, there is a nationwide number you can ring, 13 11 26. This is the Poison Centre. In Sydney, it is based at Westmead Children's Hospital. It is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week number. It is manned by a pharmacologist, a pharmacist, who will actually ask you, what did they take? How much of it did they take? How did they take it? Again, children can be very creative. When did they take it? And how big is your child? Approximately. You don't have to race into a scales and go, oh, they're 12.32. No, they're about 12 kilos or about 10 kilos. Because what they need to do is actually do the active amount of the drug against the weight of the child. Just because you buy something over a counter does not make it a safer drug. If your little one swallows half a bottle of Amoxil, fantastic diarrhea. If they swallow half a bottle of Panadol or paracetamol, they can kill their liver. So really all medicine has to be locked away. Now, if you think your child's taken something and they're well, call the Poison Centre first. If they're unwell, call the ambulance, then the Poison Centre. When you're doing something, in the past, people used to have something called Ipecac in their medicine cabinets. It may just make them vomit. You might have also heard it from Anne of Green Gables, where it was used for croup. So leave it in Anne of Green Gables. If something, and people have been very creative, cotton wool sandwiches and all these kind of things, please, all those other wives' tales, leave aside, don't make them vomit, don't give them cotton wool sandwiches. If something has burnt them on the way down, it will burn them on the way up, and if they're a bit groggy, rather than vomiting it out, they might breathe it into their lungs. So just leave it there and let the hospital deal with it. Thanks. So what can we do? If it's a poison, as a household chemical or medicine, use it, put it back in a safe place, lock it. If it's an old medicine, take it up to the pharmacy, they'll get rid of it. Leave it in its original container so you know what it is. In the past, people used to put them into drink containers and they go, oh, but it's kerosene, it smells, and it's blue coloured. Well, there's blue Sprite and kids don't smell something before they drink it. So it's really important to leave it in the original containers. The other thing is kids love to play mummy and daddy. So if you are taking medicines, do it when they're not watching. Or as I used to do when I was taking the pill, I used to go, oh, mummy, yucky pill, oh, tastes terrible. I didn't do it when they weren't watching. but there was no way they were going to think of having it because I obviously didn't like using it. Next one. Right, bites and stings. 4 main groups, the ones that kill you. These are the snakes, the funnel web and the mouse spider, the cone shell, the blue-ringed octopus. In the past, we used to use a tourniquet. And the tourniquet was really tight over the top of the arm or the top of the leg, stop the blood coming in, stop the blood and the poison going out. Worked really well, except for one small detail. It used to be so tight, it used to kill the skin and the muscle and everything else underneath. So if someone has been bitten by a shark and they're spurting blood, tourniquet to stop the blood. But otherwise, instead we use what's called a pressure and mobilisation bandage. Now, when you get your first aid kit, you'll probably get a crepe bandage and some pads and things, but you mightn't get an elasticized bandage. And this is the best to have, especially if you're bushwalking or even Australian backyards these days, is having a pressure and mobilisation bandage. I bought this one from Woolies, but you can get really fancy ones from your chemist that have little shapes on them, and you know how far to pull them when the shape turns into a certain shape. So what we do is say I've been bitten on my arm and I'm very brave. Put my pad on, put crepe bandage around it, and then with my elasticized bandage from my fingertips, I pull it as hard as I possibly can, and this is going to compress the blood to stop it coming into the arm and stop the blood and the poison going out. So we're going to do it as hard as we possibly can. Say this one only goes up to here, then I put another one up to there. Now that's going to compress the arm, which is great, but we're all then going to immobilise the arm by either strapping it to the chest, or if it's on our legs, we then start from our toes, go all the way up the legs. And for children, for adults you can say don't move around. For children, you strap their 2 legs together and it immobilises them. Now suppose I've been bitten here, I'll then put a little X, who's ever bandaging, and put a little X. So when they get to hospital, they only have to remove this part to look at it. Now, if it's non-fatal, like an ant, a wasp, a redback spider, then the cold compress and pain relief. If it's marine, the blue bottle, the stonefish, the stingray, then we use hot water, because the reason for that is the hot water unravels. It's a protein. It's like when we cook an egg and the white comes out clear and goes yellow. It's because the protein's been unravelled. Then if we put hot water on these stings, it unravels the protein sting. People have also used cold in the past. Now, cold does unravel the protein, but not nearly as well as hot water. And people have also used wee. Now, I hate to disillusion you, but it's probably the warmth of the wee rather than the wee itself that worked. However, and people sometimes use vinegar, and we don't use vinegar anymore. However, in the tropics, the irrigangi, the box jellyfish, this is when we use our vinegar, and we're just going to go through each one. Okay, so for bees, they're only dangerous. I mean, they can give a nasty sting and you can get redness and soreness and things like that, but only if the child is allergic would you use your pressure and mobilisation bandage. To get out the sting is sticking out. If I use my tweezers, I'm going to squeeze the poison back in. So if you scrape sideways with your Medicare card or credit card, it's going to scrape the sting and the poison out. It doesn't break off. It comes out, and that's a better way of getting more of the sting out. If they get redness or soreness, or raised red, and little red marks coming out, then go up to the doctor, because you might need some antibiotics if it's become infected, or some corticosteroid to damp it down. Also, to stop the itchiness and inflammation, when the children are older, you can get an antihistamine from the chemist. 2 types of antihistamines, one that puts you to sleep and one non-sedating. Brand name like Claritine. There's a liquid that comes from age of 2 with kids. The next one I put down is the tick, and I'm talking particularly about the Australian paralysis tick, which is sort of about this size until it swells up. It's greyish purplish, and it's all down the eastern seaboard of New South Wales. It's of Australia. The reason is, and it's getting more and more because we've baited the foxes. The fox population has gone down, bandicoot population gone up. Bandicoots can carry these ticks without being affected. They drop them on the grass, on the trees. The kids or animals brush against them and the tick goes in. In the past, we used to kill them by smothering them. And this was Vaseline, methylated spirits. However, a more high-tech way to do it, and if you're going out into the bush, is to take those wart-off sprays, the freezing sprays that will actually freeze them to death. Then you can remove them. You may, if you've got a lot around, you can get special kind of L-shape tweezers from your vets. Otherwise, you can just try and get them with your tweezer, but they do bury down quite hard. But when they go in clockwise, so when you're pulling them out, try getting them out anti-clockwise. If the child shows any symptoms, or the animal, breathing difficulties, swallowing difficulties, drowsy, weakness, especially in their lower legs, then go and get some help. This is a poison that resolves after a few days. So often they'll need only a little bit of support until their body gets rid of it. Most spiders try and identify. Most are harmless, but just being bitten, you can get a bit of nausea, vomiting, a bit of tummy pain. When you're trying to identify them, don't try and follow them around the backyard and smulch them and bring them in a little jam jar and say, this is what bit me. If you go up to the emergency department, they'll have a nice big wall chart and you can point out which one. I also know someone who actually used to just spray them with hairspray and they die instantly, so it's an easy way to collect them. Most of them will not cause any problems, but the ones we're going to talk about are the redback. Hasn't killed anyone since 1976. There is an anti-venom. These like to go in dark areas, so under houses, but also in those sand shells that you have in the play toys. Once you open them up in the morning, just go through the play toys to make sure there's no spiders there. So cold compress, calming them and going up to get help. Mouse and funnel web spider can cause death. So calming the person, that pressure immobilization bandage, or if you don't have one, a heavy crepe bandage, going from the fingers all the way up, or from the toes all the way up, sprint the limb to immobilize it after you put the pressure on, call the ambulance and get them up to hospital. The white-tailed spider, this has bacteria in its venom. So if you know it's a white-tailed spider, in the body of the spider down the bottom, there's a white spot on its tail. You wash it with whatever you can to try and get it clean. Now, if you find that what happens, it's eating into the skin, causing little ulcers, you go up to your doctor straight away because you need some antibiotics here and antibiotics one now. Okay, snakes in Australia, we're very good at snakes too, and the ones that kill you. Again, identifying them. If people say, what were they, try and tell near the head because there is some interbreeding. The other thing is, don't try and do a George of the Jungle or Tarzan. Suck out the venom, very unsanitary, and they can use that venom to tell what kind of snake it is. Keeping the child calm, putting on the pressure, put on the immobilization, and get them up to the hospital as soon as possible. As we said, for blue bottles, which is also stonefish, stingray, bull rat, caterfish, crown of thorns, flathead and scorpionfish, that sting is a poison, that sting is a protein. So if you heat it, then it unravels. So sensible, if there's a blue bottle warning, don't go on the beach. If you have the tentacles, then the hot fluid. For pain relief, don't use vinegar, and if they are allergic, you need to please call an ambulance and resuscitate as needed. Yes. However, in terms of the tropics, these ones need to be flooded with vinegar. So this is the irriganji, the sea anemone, and the jimble. Now, because of heating of our waters, what would usually just be in tropical waters are moving south. So be careful. In tropics, they will actually have a big sign up. Please don't go in the water between this time and that time. But if you're a little bit further south than that, please ask the locals, are there any around, and be careful. This is when you flood with vinegar for at least 30 seconds to stop the sting cells releasing, and put a cold pack on for pain relief. If there's no vinegar, then flick it off with a stick and wash it with seawater, and you may need to resuscitate and call an ambulance. The last one's the blue-ringed octopus or the conefish. Now, the blue-ringed octopus looks like a bit of jelly, clear jelly, when it's in a rock pool. Its rings only come out when it's about to bite. So everyone else, except not sensible humans, will know I'm about to bite, I'm about to bite, I'm about to bite. But non-sensible humans are going, look, it lights up when I touch it. So this is when you have to be there with the child, supervising, telling them not to put their fingers in there. And this is one that can stop the muscles working, so including the breathing muscles. So for this one, pressure immobilisation bandage, immobilise the limb and get them up to hospital as soon as possible. If you just excuse me for 1 minute, there was one more thing I wanted to show you. In terms of poisons, this one is personally 40% alcohol, but I have seen up to 70% alcohol, and sanitizer being made by gin companies. You and I probably wouldn't think of eating it, but there has been a sort of a surge in primary school kids liking, and a lot of them have lots of nice flavourings on, liking it and licking it, and kids have been admitted to hospital with alcohol poisoning. So this is something, yes, we need to have it around. Make sure it's one of those other things you need to lock away. So that's the end of the talk. If there are any questions, please let me know. Oh, that's just a summary of
All right, guys, we'll just have a quick look at your questions. All right, so I'll read them out loud for Deb.
Good.
So we have one from Lucy Smith. I'm just going to read what you've wrote. We were thinking you meant we had to direct blood flow to the brain. Not too sure.
Okay, no, when you push down, the blood flow, the brain is a part of the body that needs most oxygen. It's the one that needs a good blood supply, and your body will say, you're not going to be doing your typing or anything like that. I'm going to close down blood going to the rest of the body, and when I push down in a state of, when they need to be resuscitated, most of the blood will go to the brain. You don't have to direct it, your body does automatically.
Next question. Can you please show how to treat the baby choking up to 1 year olds?
Okay. So as I said, depending on how big you are, and I would normally be sitting, but you can have them on your arm. You can have them on your leg. You can have them on your lap. It's a good idea to have that gravity going down like that. Holding the jaw in a neutral position, you check beforehand to see if there's anything there you can get out, gentle with a little finger. And then after that, I'm just going to do it along my arm because it's easier to be seen. Heel of the hand between the shoulder blades, one big burst, and then see if anything comes out. Another one. You do 5. You can then turn them over and do it just on the lower part of that breastbone, then pushing up 1 per second, see if it'll come out. And you can see how it's happened, see how they're going, and then keep going. If you're needing to do it, I'll probably have the ambulance on the way as well.
Next question. Do people need to get the specific sunscreen that is designed for baby and children?
I think it's the best idea because kids have very sensitive skin. One of my daughters is now in her 20s and still has sensitive skin, and I have to get the baby one for her because I know otherwise she'll come out in a rash and swelling. So the ones that are designed for the babies and children, I think is safer, especially under 5s. If your child has sensitive skin, I would continue it.
Okay, guys, so no more final questions. Just want to say a quick thank you to Deb for having her here today and to broadcast the webinar. I apologise in advance. I'm really sorry that the internet was a bit laggy in certain areas. Unfortunately, that's something that we can't fix at this stage, but we'll make sure to send you out some of the important information that we've discussed today. You already have the slides and the different presentations as I've already sent them out. And yeah, I'll flick you an email next week in terms of links to this direct video. So thank you all very much. Stay safe, stay well, and have a great weekend.